All right, welcome back to the broadcast. You're watching KUTV Prime Time News. Of course, Evans Odhiambo and I are back, and of course, we are back with a guest. We want to speak to Tele Nzomo, that is the Programs Officer at CSFS. We just want to talk about the state of the nation, everything that is taking center stage at the country at the moment. So Tele, karibu sana at KUTV.
Thanks for having me.
We were having a side chat and I mentioned you have a very wonderful name, and our director at the other side mentioned that. So we rarely start off like this, but for the sake of someone watching us right now and is hearing about CSFS for the very first time, what is all about CSFS?
So CSFS is a youth-led organization that was formed in 2015 that began when people noticed that there was really a lack of youth participation in governance processes, and so there was a feeling between some young people that we needed to create a platform for young people and by young people to try and include them in governance processes, to try and include them in youth participation, in policy making, and just to get them interested so that they can understand what is the importance of politics and how it affects them in their lives.
Have you achieved that so far?
I can't say we've completely achieved it. It's obviously work in progress. We're only 8 years old. We're trying our best right now. We are working in 12 counties and still growing. So there are challenges here and there, obviously, with the young people, trying to get them in politics and trying to get them in governance processes. But we're seeing how we can do that, especially through social media and also through physical activities. Yeah.
Now, what do you, CSFS, now make of High Court's ruling yesterday declaring the 50 CAS appointed by President William Ruto as unconstitutional?
I think first and foremost, we can say that we're happy that we have a vibrant court, and a court that can actually rule against incumbent presidents. We've seen it, obviously, going back into the previous regime. So it's good that the judiciary seems to be keeping its independence, at least thus far. There's also been the question of the legality of the matter, right? And a lot of questions around the issues of public participation, issues of the legal framework that actually brings into this position of the CAS. So I'm happy that at least the judiciary has attempted to address those issues. There could be obviously an appeal, which we will look forward to and see just what the Court of Appeal says, if or when it happens. So I think for now we can say that we are pleasantly, we're happy with the ruling as it is.
This appeal that you are mentioning about, you're talking about, why do you think there is need for an appeal now to have the president now bring back, the courts agree to bring back these 50 CAS posts?
I suspect, this is just now me trying to analyze the situation, I suspect that we will see the president trying to go to the Court of Appeal. Obviously, this is a matter that has a lot of political interest. The people who were appointed, majority of them are politicians, people who vied and lost, or former politicians in that case. So that level of political interest, I think the president might try and go to the appeal, or just try and seek another way of redress. Yeah.
Yesterday, while the judges were making that ruling, lawyer Elias Mutuma described the judgment as a win-loss situation, and they were arguing that the president can restart the process and just follow due process, something that you as CSFS also agree with. I was trying to follow up on your platform, and I understand that you mentioned something about this. It's a win-loss situation, right? Now, during the creation of this office, don't you think that the president knew about the procedures he needed to take before the 50 CAS were appointed?
We've seen in the past presidents making decisions, and this goes to Uhuru Kenyatta's regime, decisions that have gone to the court and have been nullified. So it's very difficult to sit back and just say that the president knew. Maybe he thought that there's an argument they could make in court to try and rule in favor of this. There are those people, of course, who have read some sort of malice on the side of the president, that he was just trying to string along some of these politicians, and he knew that it wasn't going to go far. It's very difficult to tell his intentions. We can only speculate. But as I said, yes, it might be a win-loss. They could actually look at the judgment and actually consider this is actually how we can go about putting these positions of the CS, probably in a legal manner. On a personal level, I wouldn't be too keen on that because of just the current financial situation we're in. As you guys were just mentioning in the news, the president himself has just mentioned that the wage bill is currently too high, right? I think he said 11% of best practice. Right. So I'm not too keen on this idea of just adding to recurrent expenditure. But yeah, the president might try and I think he has some options which he will try and look at moving forward.
Right. Now, while other Kenyans see this move by the High Court as a win for them, especially now that the cost of living is on its peak, we understand that other Kenya Kwanza leaders see this ruling as unfair, right? So do you think that this is anyway a win for Kenyans?
Yeah, I think it's a win for Kenyans. As I said, first and foremost, to have a judiciary that can actually rule against a government in Africa. In some parts of Africa, it's still not a common practice. We are going to talk about, I think we're going to talk about Sabasaba at some point. But you remember one of the issues that was there, if you go back to the Kanu regime, was that during that period, people did not believe or people did not think that you could go to the judiciary. So the independence of the judiciary, number one, is a very, very big win. And as I said, I think I think this idea of the president just adding, a large number of people to government without really a very good reason. There wasn't really a good reason for these posts as to why, even if you're justified in wanting to bring a CS, why you'd want to have 50 of them. I think, these are questions that I think he didn't quite answer. So yeah, I would agree it's a win for Kenyans.
Right. I don't know, what's your take on the housing levy and the Finance Act in general, that the finance law that was just assented into law? What do you make of the 1.5% housing levy before I come now to my main question?
I don't think that we've quite understood why the housing levy was there. And remember, it's something that has changed a lot. It started as a fund, now it's a levy. We've had all manner of explanations for it. Number one, it was we want to give people houses. We want now to give people jobs. It's not something that was clearly defined. I don't think I have read somewhere a policy statement from government saying that this is actually what we want to do with housing, right? If it is a fund, this is how we are actually going to implement it. We've had double speak from the president, from the principal secretary. There hasn't been anything concrete for me to understand that this is why we need it. So, I'm not too keen on it. I'm not too keen on the idea of the housing levy per se. Yeah.
All right. Now, a report by Tifa has just said that 54% of Kenyans are skeptical about receiving houses despite being compelled to pay this 1.5% of that housing levy. And some Kenyans also feel, this is according to Tifa, some Kenyans also feel that the purpose of President William Ruto's budget is to allow for corruption. What do you make of that report?
Again, it's not a report I've looked into deeply. I've just seen what has been reported on the news. But I think that the findings there have some merit to it. Yeah, it is true that Kenyans are skeptical of the idea of getting a house. Actually, majority of the people, because this is being taxed, it's employed people who are being taxed. And I know that people are really skeptical as to how that will actually help them. On the issue of financing corruption, that is obviously something that is a problem in this country. We have already seen scandals, right, from the healthcare to issues of oil. We've seen scandals in this country in this current regime, and we haven't yet reached a full year of the regime. So yes, there's a feeling that we haven't sealed the loopholes, right, that should have been sealed before we say that we actually want to increase. We want to increase revenue. You've had his economic advisor, the chairman of the Economic Council, speak about government wastage, and speak about the fact, in some cases, actually say we did not promise that we were going to fight corruption. So I think Kenyans I think it's okay for Kenyans, or it's right that Kenyans are actually skeptical and are thinking that this will lead to corruption cases or that it will finance corruption.
Right now, what are you doing as CSFS now to ensure that you are amplifying the voices of Kenyans? These are most importantly those that are now losing hope in this current regime. What do you recommend should be done as CSFS?
Well, what we're trying to do, number one, is to try and first of all understand what exactly are the people saying. I think one of the issues that as civil society we've had is that sometimes we can be disconnected from the people themselves. So we're trying to have a voice with the people in the community. We had a series, for example, on social media called Mfuko Mfukoni, where we actually went to different areas in Nairobi. We went to Kibra, we went to Mukuru, and we were trying to document stories which we posted online of people talking about just how the current state of the economy is affecting them. And that's the current state of the economy even before the finance bill. So we're really just trying to have these voices heard, because at the end of the day, it's not having us as staff of CSFS being heard, but actually trying to give a platform to the people in this country, and especially the young people in this country, to be heard.
Now, with the planned Azimir country rally that will be on Friday, at this point in time, do you really think that the conversation is about the cost of living? Now that we have seen that the previous rallies that they have done have not really borne any fruit at the moment. So what do you think? Do you think there's something different this time around?
Yeah, I think the finance bill is a very different thing that has come out. I think if you go back to where Azimir started with the issues of Mandamano, initially they were so focused on electoral justice, or what they perceived was electoral injustice in the latter election. And I think majority of the Kenyans were not necessarily, did not necessarily feel that was an issue. I think people just wanted to move on from the election. But the finance bill and the cost of living is something now that is actually hurting Kenyans. We've already seen, fuel prices, fuel prices have already increased. Yeah, you use an Uber right now, and you just speak to the Uber driver. You can already feel the frustration already starting to set in. The state of the economy right now, I think, is going to be something very different, and it's going to, I think, make more Kenyans want to be more involved in at least trying to speak up against the government, even if they're not speaking, even if they're not using the platforms that Azimir has provided, that maybe they want to, organize themselves as young people, organize themselves as communities. I think we're going to now see more and more people speaking against the government, especially on this issue.
But when they say things like they would want to remove President William Ruto from the government, which is something that is, I would say, impossible at this time, but that leaves us with the question, is this really about the people of Kenya, or is it something that is of personal interest to them?
I would say, and this is my personal opinion, that a lot of times when we deal with politicians, whether you're dealing with Azimir, whether dealing with Kenya Kwanza, that a lot of what they do tends to be guided by personal interest. Some people have said that when it comes to politicians only care about national interest if that interest is aligned with their own personal interest. So I do think they have seen an opportunity here where they can actually attack the government on some of these issues. It's also important to remember that if you look at some of the promises that Azimir had made, Azimir also had, during the campaign, Azimir also had a very ambitious plan. That ambitious plan had to be financed somehow. And, it's very hard to think that they themselves would not have tried to, raise the cost of living in this country. Maybe not to the extent, or maybe not in the same way that Kenya Kwanza has done. So yes, there's a level of hypocrisy on the level of Azimir to that extent. And also just to add that, the finance bill comes in to finance the budget, right? Yes, we had a lot of opposition on the finance bill, but we didn't really hear opposition on the budget. For somebody to say, why are we spending so much, right? We didn't hear that, especially from the opposition, in trying to say this is our proposal in as far as expenditure, first and foremost, that we can reduce expenditure or we can change expenditure to this extent, and then from there, we then can talk about the finance bill. So yeah, there's a level of hypocrisy, in my opinion, that it's just politicians trying to look at weaknesses and trying to exploit them.
Do you think that should they have been given room, they would have done things different right now, in accordance with in regards to this Finance Act?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think it would have been very different. I'm looking at it from the extent, again, from the expenditure, again, from the all the promises that they were making. You know, they wanted to give 6,000 shillings to every single Kenyan. You know, that money had to come from somewhere. So they had very ambitious plans. And one of the questions I always ask myself, or one of maybe the mistake that we made, and that's we as civil society, you as media, Kenyans in general, we didn't necessarily put these politicians to task, right? We didn't actually ask them, these are the promises that you're making us. How are you going to fund them? And that, by the way, goes back to 2013, you know, when the then candidate Uhuru Kenyatta was promising a lot of infrastructure. Yeah, he promised, you know, whether it was the standard gauge railway, all the roads, he did promise a lot of infrastructure, and we didn't really put him to task as to how we were going to finance. And when he started to borrow, you know, we found ourselves in a tricky situation. So I think it's also a moment for us as Kenyans, and us as those of us in institutions that hold politicians to account, to look at how better or what we can do moving forward in as far as ensuring if there are elections, what can we do to ensure that we have the full plan from these politicians?
Do you think we are moving towards really just being independent and making sure that our leaders moving forward are creating an environment where each and every Kenyan is satisfied with how they're delivering their promises that they're making, rather?
It's still difficult for me to judge that. I think that we have a few challenges. One being obviously ethnicity. You know, we still do like to at the end of the day during elections to come back and saying we're voting for our person, we're voting for the people in this community. It will be interesting to see how that changes, especially as generations change. Are we able to move away from that? It will also be interesting to see how people react, especially those people in the Kenya Kwanza strongholds, because the finance bill at the end of the day will affect everybody. The high cost of living will affect everybody. It will be interesting to see how people respond to that. You know, especially to the larger politicians. I think, in as far as the members of parliament, I think those ones will be held to account. You know, we always have a high turnover in parliament, so we might see a number of them not coming back, you know, in the next election.
My director is telling me about time, but before I let you go, I would want to know your opinion about these signatures that the Azimir coalition is talking about. They want to bring the public together to sign signatures in order to propel the government to bring down the cost of living. But do you think that these signatures will be effective at the moment, now that we're talking about the cost of living?
I don't expect the signatures right now to be effective in as far as reducing the cost of living. I genuinely believe that the one thing that will make this government listen is not an initiative actually led by politicians. I think if Kenyans can actually organize themselves independent of Azimir, independent of Kenya Kwanza, and they speak up against this government, and it is a nationwide organization in the sense that it isn't just a few regions, but all regions. I think that is when this government will actually start listening, when an initiative that is people-led and people-driven.
All right, thank you so much. That is Telen Zomo, the programs officer at CSFS. And of course, as you said, if you're hearing about CSFS for the first time, it is an organization that amplifies the voices of the youth politically, right?
Governance and governance issues, general governance issues.
Thank you so much for your time, Zomo.